Hey, I'm Morgan.
I'm Chris. Welcome to the Midlife Mud,
where we promise to bring the real shit, all the grit, and pretty much zero clue about how to deal with this crazy phase of life.
And by the way, because this is all about feeling less alone, what we want most is to connect with you.
Absolutely. So take a few seconds and visit themidlifemud.com and join our community.
And you'll stay up to date on all the dirt.
And even better, become a part of the conversation.
We can't wait to see you there. All right, tighten those boots and let's get muddy.
Welcome back to the mud.
The mud.
What's going on in your mud?
Well, I am steadily climbing through April, which the weather here sucks. Probably it's not as bad as the weather where you are.
No, there's lots of actual literal mud and floodwater where I am right now.
There's literal mud and floodwater.
Yeah.
Here it's just rain and depression, which is better than what you have.
By the way, I found out it was an EF3 tornado that went through 20 minutes from my house. That's a pretty strong tornado.
I love the story where you're like, yeah, well, Mom went to take her car to the shop the next day and one of the walls was gone. So she went home. I'm like, oh.
She didn't even know. Like, she's like, I didn't hear any sirens. I'm like, oh my God, Mom, get to the basement.
In some indirect way, I'm kind of proud of her for being that disconnected, but...
True. Probably a year ago, they would have been glued.
Glued, yeah.
What else is new? Anything?
Well, I feel like it's owed at least an acknowledgement because we have talked about him several times in different episodes. The passing of Val Kilmer.
I know.
So sad.
It was so sad. Not that I was following him a lot later in his life, but I did watch that documentary about him a couple years ago. And wow, just man. He really had it rough the last 10 years of his life.
He did. And even in his earlier life, in more of an emotional way, he had a lot of challenges that he went through.
Yeah. So he will be missed. And I've seen a lot of the tributes and that kind of stuff. It's been fun to watch that. And actually more recent interviews that I had not seen, which I found fascinating. It was neat to see how self-aware he had become.
Yeah.
Because I know some people say he wasn't super fun to work with when he was younger. He says it himself. He was very egotistical and he thought he knew everything. And
he really made that work in his role as Iceman.
Oh. Well, and Real Genius. He really...
And Real Genius, that's
yeah,
true.
I'm like, how much acting was there and how much... No, he was good. He was really good.
Yeah, he was.
And the Doors, all the singing that he did.
I forgot about the Doors.
And even the singers or the band members couldn't distinguish his voice versus Jim Morrison, right?
Mm-hmm. That's impressive.
I don't know. Anyway, spring break just wrapped up and our state just passed a new law that kids at the age of 15 can now get their driving permit. And so I have an appointment in a couple of weeks for my 15-year-old to go get his permit, which, is really exciting for him and a little bit nerve-wracking for us. But
I was going to say, did you extend your meditation time each day?
But I have mixed feelings about it. I think it's actually it can be really good.
Yeah.
It's going to give them the opportunity to practice more earlier on because they still can't get their license until they're 16. But
right.
It's a reminder of where I am in the parenting journey. And it's a scary place.
Yes. 15.
We've established 15 is the shittiest age of all time.
It's bad. I did have one other thing that's quasi-inspired by what we're going to talk about today, which you'll introduce in a minute, but it is basketball, of course, is coming to a close, and the women had their final game yesterday, and UConn, which is in the Northeast, obviously, won for their 12th time, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that I like about this story is not the sheer number of times they've won. That coach has been doing this for 40 years. And there was a moment at the end of the game where one of the star players, Paige Beckers, comes up. And she's a very tough kind of kid. And so this is not typical for her personality.
Mm-hmm.
She comes off the court, embraces the coach, and just starts sobbing.
Mm-hmm.
And the coach returns that. And I thought, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that display of emotion publicly and what it suggests that he was to her and what she was to him. And I just thought it was so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I would love to see more of that.
Yes.
Okay. Well,
What are we getting into?
what are we getting into today? God, we wanted to talk more about just raising teens in general in today's age. I don't know how many of you have watched the show Adolescents on Netflix, but that's sort of where this conversation stems from. And so if you have not watched it, that's okay. You don't necessarily have to. Just know that there may be some spoilers. But I would actually recommend that you do watch it. Whether you've got kids or not, I think there's a lot of important themes in it that are just relevant for anybody who's living in today's world. So, first off, we want to talk a little bit about how much has changed in parenting teenagers today versus when we were teenagers, like 30 years ago, right? It's a lot different than it was for our parents, for better or for worse, really.
Yeah, well, the world has changed so much.
Tons.
And I was trying to think of ways to just, in a concrete format, highlight some of that. And if we just look at technology over the course of the last 45 years or so, I mean, holy shit, we are living in a totally different world. And I got curious about it, and I went back and just for fun created a little outline. I mean, there was some testing of what we now know as the modern internet in the 70s, but the accepted birthday of the modern internet, even before we knew about dial-up, 1983 was kind of when the internet was born. Now, it wasn't really being used by anybody widespread. It wasn't a public thing.
Right.
But remember that little company, AOL?
Oh, yeah.
You've got mail.
I have a Pavlovian response to that. I mean, that just makes me want to go, ooh, I got to check it,
I know. So that was what year?
Oh, geez.
1993.
93.
So 93, AOL started assigning emails. So emails were starting to get publicly used. Imagine that. And then 95, AOL reached 1 million users.
Which is like nothing.
Well, it reminds me of Austin Powers when he's like, $1 million.
Yeah.
I mean, nowadays, an influencer has like 50 million followers.
Yeah.
And then flash forward to social media. Remember MySpace?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I do.
2003, quickly followed by Facebook in 2004.
Yeah.
So that was really the flashpoint for social media as we know it. And then the first iPhone was 2007.
I was pregnant with our first child.
I mean, hold up for a second. We are less than 20 years in.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's been exponentially faster.
Right.
And now here we are with AI, right? And who the hell knows what's going to happen with that and what the implications are there.
Well, AI is a funny thing because it's already so pervasive in our world. And I think some of us are well informed on that, but many of us don't even realize the extent at which
it's used.
AI is being used today, not tomorrow.
And has been.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So that's a quick little walk down technology lane. Certainly things are a lot different now than they were in 1983.
A shit ton different.
Right.
Yeah. Things are different than the King's Quest days at the Oregon Trail.
We used to call Dad in the middle of work to get like the prompt code, the DOS language to type in to get on to King's Quest.
Yes. That was such a fun game.
And then he had that template that he would lay out across his keyboard so that he could use the word processor. Remember that? It was literally like a cardboard fold out.
Yeah. Oh, God. So we've come a long, long way. I'm not sure exactly where we are, but we've come a long way from where we were. And, there have been a lot of other things aside from technology that have evolved and changed in the last 30 years. We have a lot more LGBTQ rights. The concept of gender roles has really loosened a lot. It's not like women are staying home and being the homemaker and men are the breadwinners. That's shifted even more in the last 30 years.
And it's interesting. That's a good one to bring up. And it strikes home for me because we grew up in a time when that was really beginning.
Yeah.
We were the first generation where pervasively men and women were both starting to work.
Yes.
And that whole term, remember, latchkey kid?
So that was us.
That was us.
Yeah.
I mean, no, Nana was there.
That's true. She was.
Yeah.
But I think we were starting to see that. Like, mom was working tons, dad was working tons. The difference was that mom was also still doing most of the homemaking.
I know.
And working tons.
Which wasn't fair.
Right. And so now that's shifted even more to where men are doing the laundry and the cooking, men are staying home with the kids, it's all blurred more, right? There's not these distinct roles anymore, which is a big change. Even the concept of gender identity, and fluidity has shifted over time, which that's a whole topic in and of itself. We've had the Me Too movement. People are believing women more when it comes to that kind of thing.
Yeah.
There's a very much, and I think we saw a really big boom with COVID and the pandemic, this increased awareness of mental health and the importance of mental health. So some of these things are great that have changed. But the bottom line is that a shit ton has changed since we were teenagers.
Right.
And so we as parents are navigating what feel like uncharted waters. I mean, first of all, we've never parented before, right? So it's uncharted in that way. But it's also like we don't have the luxury of going to our parents and being like, hey, what did you do about social media with your kids or with us? It wasn't even a concept back then. So big change.
So how does all that really tie back to the Adolescent show?
Yeah, let's just take a sec to talk about that show. Whew. I think I came to you and said, hey, I don't even know what to say, but I feel like you got to watch this.
Right. And I was like, oh, okay. And like,
said, but no. This is not like a sit down and relax kind of show.
Right. I watched it and I think I texted you something to the effect of, fuck, there's a lot there. I don't even know what to do with that.
Yeah.
Because it's just such an intense show. And the way that they frame it is so intense.
Yeah.
And it really makes an impact.
Yeah, the fact that they shoot it all in each episode is one shot.
Yeah.
Really makes you feel like you cannot come up for air.
And even the way that they'll pick someone that comes into the room and then they'll follow that person out of the room. And now you're in that person's reality.
Yeah.
It's very well done in that way and impactful. I'll tell you, the number one thing that I took away was just a tremendous amount of empathy. And depending on what episode and what the focus was of that episode, I felt empathy for every single one of the main characters.
Not to take away from the fact that the crime itself, the girl being murdered,
was wrong.
She was absolutely the primary victim.
Absolutely.
But oh my God, everybody in this show was a victim.
In some way.
In a way, yeah.
Right.
You can't watch it and not be affected by that.
Yes. The other thing that really struck me is this kind of polarizing difference in the realities of the adults and the reality of the teenagers.
Two different worlds.
It just really struck me. Like, whoa, two different worlds that lacked a really good connecting point. So there was just so much lost in translation.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of tragedy in that, going back to the empathy, because I could see if only this had happened, or if they had known this, they could have stepped in. It could have ended differently. And
they probably would have.
Right.
Right? These parents are not deadbeat parents who don't give a shit about their kid. And, these are parents who are flawed, like all of us are. They have their own crap, that they're their own histories that they're bringing into their parenting, but they love their kids. And even still, this tragedy happens, and so it does make you look at yourself and go, well, shit, what do I need to do? What can I do? What am I doing? Or what do I need to do that I have not been doing? And
another pause point, and this really speaks more to the structure of the show that I thought was I like the way that it was done, was the arresting police officer had a son that was a peer of all of these kids that went to school together. And so he wasn't free of this either. He did. There were a lot of things that were lost in his world as well that his kid was going through. He didn't understand it,
Mm-hmm.
just like the aggressors' parents were in the dark too.
Well, and I don't know that that's necessarily super unique in that I think as teenagers, I remember feeling like I've got this whole life that mom and dad like aren't privy to.
Right.
Because we just, we don't talk about that stuff. And I'm like growing up. I've got my own identity, I knew that mom and dad were there if I needed them. But aside from that, it was like, I've got my life. And I don't think that that's unique to adolescence. I just think that now the extent to which that is happening and the reach of our communities because of online life is so drastically different than it used to be, which just amplifies that.
Yeah. So the way I think about that is you take a really hard time of life, which is coming of age, right? And identifying yourself as a unique person, separating from your family model.
Right, which is what you're supposed to be doing in that time frame.
Right. And then you add on to it this other layer of stuff, this whole world that is kind of a little bit outside of the physical world. And it's less seen and it's less talked about and it's more private. It's very challenging.
Yeah. And back to social media and online presence, I feel like that emboldens people to behave in ways that they may not in person. And it just fans the flames.
Right.
Yeah. My response to the show, I couldn't help but be viewing it from a parental perspective. I mean, I think there's a whole lot there. But mostly I was viewing it through the lens of a parent. Like if I were those parents, I've got 3 teenage boys right now. And so I kept putting myself in the shoes of Jamie's parents. And it just made me feel this combination of real sadness for him and sort of that reminding, unsettling feeling that I am not in control yet again. As a parent, there's only so much you can do. And we'll talk a little bit more about like, what can we do? But it feels like, God, they're their own people and they're going to make their own decisions. I actually reached out to some people on Facebook about this, like people that have watched the show and what did they think? And sort of the response was, man, I really feel sorry for these kids.
Yeah.
Like there is so much extra noise that we did not have to deal with when we were kids. And as parents, we are clueless about what's out there. We don't know.
Yeah.
And again, back to that idea that we ultimately are not in control, even when we do know these things, even when we are educated, we still have to let go and let them do what they're going to do. So there was a lot of instant like, okay, I want to know how I can do the best I can as a parent. So I think that's really primarily where this episode stems from.
And maybe there's 2 themes there around parenting, at least in today's world. How do we keep them safe and how do we stay connected?
Yeah.
And honestly, I really get stuck with these.
I do too.
I don't have any magic formula. I can tell you that I worry about these every day, every single day.
I think these are the bottom line questions that I have because I feel like if I can do those 2 things, I can let go and they can do what they are going to do.
Right.
But those are 2 things they're not always easy to do, especially with teenagers. So yeah, that's the primary theme of what we're going to talk about today. Also woven into those, which we won't spend a lot of time on, but kind of the idea of generational trauma. You can see it in the show in the way that Jamie's dad talks about his own dad and that whole situation and how then it's passed down to Jamie. And I think there's plenty to be said about the effect of generational trauma. Unless we deal with our stuff as a family and personally, individually, that stuff is going to trickle straight on down, right? So that's important. There's also this concept of what they call the manosphere, which really fosters toxic masculinity as a response to ultra-feminism. So we talked about how, things have shifted more, the Me Too movement, and women are like big and strong, and this is great. And I'm all about this, by the way. But there are some groups of men that feel threatened at the same time, and they've gone down this rabbit hole called the manosphere, where they're really teaching all this rhetoric about aggression towards women. to sort of regain, quote, power. And that was at play for sure in this show. But let's talk more about what the unique struggles are in parenting teenagers today. We've already said adolescence is just, it's not the most fun time. I mean, I remember my adolescence. I don't know that there's any adolescent that loves adolescence. You're trying to figure out who you are.
Yeah.
You're trying to break away and establish independence. And it's like a push-pull all the time with your parents.
Right. I mean, even to the degree of like taking more time in the bathroom and not being told like when it's time to eat or when it's time to get up, or there's this ironically natural desire in this period of time to start trying to control the circumstance more in an effort to emerge as a unique person. And, we're doing this in this complex backdrop of having this double life. There's the physical life, people in the house that I live in, right?
You mean the real one? The actual real life.
Yeah, the one
Yeah.
that I can like touch physically.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the digital life. And honestly, I feel like an infant in that. I don't really understand what it is to have a digital life in the way that my kids do.
Yeah.
And as such, I feel completely unequipped to manage the complexities of that. Like, I don't even understand it.
I wouldn't even know where to look for some of this stuff.
No, I don't. And so going back to the show for a minute, it's one of the points that I just had such deep empathy for the parents, because my takeaway or kind of assessment of the situation is that before the murder basically happened, the parents had some clues. Not that that was going to happen to that extreme, but that maybe things weren't right and they were just telling themselves, well, I don't know, maybe it'll be okay. And then it clearly wasn't okay.
Yeah.
And I think that's everybody's worst fear as a parent. Is certainly mine, is that something horrible is going to happen and I didn't take action when I could have. And
Yeah.
how do I even know? And because I do want them to be individuals. I don't want to like be over controlling.
Right. But it is. It's one of those things where retrospectively you can look back and be like, oh yeah, those are red flags. But in the moment, would I have noticed the flags? I don't know.
Right.
I think it's difficult because, at least for me, I really want to give my kids enough rope to explore and figure out the boundaries of who they are for themselves. But they still got to be attached to the rope. You know what I mean? I'm not going to just like cut them loose because they're not adults yet. And so it's a tricky line to walk. I think there are times when I wish I had never gotten phones for my kids, at least not at the ages that they were. I think there are choices that we can make as parents. And again, they're very individual choices.
Right.
You do what you feel is right for you and your family.
God, it is such a slippery slope, though, with
It
those
is.
phones. Because, I can call all the time and I can be in touch and I can put on,
I know.
The location tracking and all of that stuff. But then, is that over controlling, first of all?
Yeah.
And then second of all, you're giving them access to all of these other things of which it's hard to support.
It is. Well, and maybe you're not giving them, maybe you have it locked down to a certain degree.
Oh, yeah, that's worked real well for you.
That's how we started out. Exactly. Yeah. They wear you down, or you can get this one app that, by the way, didn't even realize does XYZ. And by the way, once they've downloaded it, you can't take it away. You can delete it, but then if you ever give them the App Store back, they can re-download it without permission because they've downloaded it in the past. So it gets really slippery. And then it becomes like, okay, do I physically take away the device for a period of time? Or, I've even toyed with the idea of like, maybe I just give them a watch. They just have the watch. And so I can still see where they are and they can still call me and talk to their friends. But like, there's no social media on the watch. I don't think there's any perfect solution. Even the people that are not getting phones for their kids, there's issues with that too. You're going to run into some problems with that too. So it's really just like pick your poison.
Well, and I look at it this way. The reality is, we just talked about it. Technology is here and it's going to be here, and it's not going to be here like it is now. It's going to be even more prevalent.
Mm-hmm.
It's still rapidly evolving. And so to not give them a phone and not be working with how to manage this effectively is...
And then all of a sudden when they turn 16 or 18, then you give them the phone? You know?
I know. It's a real conundrum of which I profess to have zero clue, no answers.
Yeah.
But I have a lot of questions and, quite frankly, depending on the day, anxiety about it.
I do too. And there's also the fact that schools are utilizing phones more in the education.
Right. Which on one hand is quite appropriate because when you get in the workplace,
Right.
guess what? Technology is pervasively used.
Right.
But
so it just feels like we were talking earlier about this gravitational pull. Like we don't even have a choice. We're all being pulled with this technology
tractor beam
evolution. Exactly. And so as parents, I feel like I'm constantly sort of playing tug of war and digging my heels in to just slow it down a little bit or do something so that it's not so prevalent in my kids' lives. I'm not really succeeding, by the way, but that's what I'm trying to do. And I want to talk a little bit more about, because this show is centered around this boy, right, who commits this crime. And that hits home for me with my boys being the ages that they are. And it really got me thinking about what is it to be a man? You know, how do boys in this day and age, what are they looking to? What are they influenced by? And what does it really mean to be a man?
So I'm just going to ask another question. Not really. I don't have an answer.
That's not fair. I wanted the answers to the universe.
You know, as a man, this seems so critical to me. And it's something that I am still working on as a man. And that is how to show compassion and demonstrate empathy as a man.
Which I want to say, I feel like there has been a trend over the course of the last 30 years. I mean, just like I said, gender roles have started to kind of dissolve a little bit. Yeah. You know, there's a trend towards men being able, it being more acceptable, I'll say, for men to show up in that way, right?
Yes. This conversation gets really complex with gender roles and fluidity. What I'm talking about is, you know, my identification is as a man. So as a man, that includes, you know, some masculine roles. But how do I show compassion and empathy within that construct of identifying as a man?
Yeah.
And that may not be everybody's question, right? Depending on what gender you identify with. But that's one that I certainly connect with. And when I see other boys that are identifying as boys/men, my challenge to myself is, how am I modeling that? And how am I demonstrating it? And that's part of why I brought out the Yukon women's coach, because that was a public display of a guy, you know, really showing some compassion for someone in an emotional way in a very public setting.
Yeah, that actually makes me think about the book Raising Boys.
Yeah.
He talks about how in the course of a boy's life, ages like 1 to 6 is where the mom is incredibly important. And then between like 6 and 14 is when dad is then layered in, you know, as a really important figure. And that's when they're starting to look to their dad as what it is to be a man, what a man does, how he behaves in the world. And then from 14 on, you're looking at mentors, male mentors become really important. And you talking about that coach, even though I know it's totally different situation with, you know, a college female team, but that is, I feel like that's part of where boys are looking, you know. So my boys are in that time frame now where those outside men are influencing. And so who are those? Are they coaches? Are they some randos online? You know what I mean?
So I have this really cool visual memory that comes to mind with your oldest two boys. And I was visiting from out of town on one of my work trip things back when I was traveling a ton for work. And it's funny how this moment becomes more powerful now than maybe it was in the moment. But I got up at like 5 in the morning.
Oh, yeah.
And
I know the story.
we had said, like, I'm going to get up at 5 in the morning, but it wasn't announced multiple times or anything like that.
Because you had a really early flight or something.
Super early.
Yeah.
So.
And for reference, how old were they? They were what?
11 and 9, 9 and 7,
Yeah.
something like that.
They were not too cool for us yet.
No, but I went up to the kitchen to get the ironing board to iron my shirt because I had to go to meetings all day and be dressed up. And I'm in the kitchen and the two boys come down in their pajamas and just sat on the floor and talked to me at 5 in the morning. And they did that on their own.
Yeah.
They just wanted to watch me iron my shirt and they were invested in it. They were asking questions about ironing shirts and amazing.
And you are one of those mentors for them, 1,000%, you know?
Right. And there's a great honor in that. But also there's kind of this like, whoa, boy, I'm a mentor.
Responsibility? Oh, crap.
I better tighten it up here.
Yeah, but it's true. It really speaks to the whole it takes a village to raise kids, you know, and it is true for girls too. I'm really just honing in on boys because of this show and because the teenagers that I currently have are boys. And so I can only speak to that experience right now.
Yes.
But I'm constantly thinking like, okay, I know they're looking at their dad. I know that they're looking at you. I know they're definitely influenced by whatever's going on online. And so being diligent about taking a peek into that world, you know, what that looks like, who they're talking to. By the way, I hate Snapchat. I hate it. I hate it.
So there's a really interesting challenge for me to understand, right? Because on one hand, the norm seems to be, and again, I'm an idiot when it comes to this stuff, so I may not be understanding it correctly, but we're taking pictures of, it's common to post like where you are, like what you look like. You know, there's this certain facial expression that seems common. There's like this language around it, right? But in doing that, you're not actually in the physical moment that you're in. You're in the digital moment, taking a picture of your physical moment. It's very confusing. So where are you? Like, what moment are you actually?
Right. Well, it's the double life thing, like you said.
Right. Maybe I just need tutoring about it. I don't know.
Well, I feel like I know a little bit and I still feel clueless.
Right.
You know?
Right.
I mean, and I think too, with being online and having so much of a digital presence, not being in the life that you're actually in, I think there's also this, like, we're depleted of empathy, right? When we're not able to actually be in real life as much. And so the Adolescents show really highlighted, okay, how do we teach our kids empathy in today's world?
Can we just break down empathy a little bit?
Yeah, like what is empathy?
Yeah, what is it?
So I think of it as being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes.
Yeah.
Right?
I definitely agree with that. And I mentioned the word compassion.
Yeah.
A little bit earlier. And to me, that's the understanding of the full spectrum of life, right? It's the understanding and acceptance that life is full of struggles, but it's also full of joy and it can be full of sadness. Like it's the whole range.
For everybody.
Right. And so having compassion is super paramount to being able to have empathy, because to be able to put yourself in someone's shoes, you have to accept and understand like that range of emotion.
Yeah. And then you're able to extend compassion. So back to that question, like how do we teach that to our kids? And, you know, I would say for sure modeling that in the way that we interact with our kids and also, you know, other relationships that our kids are seeing. And I think there's something really important about being present with whatever is showing up. Like that's what modeling empathy is. And so I keep thinking of, like, my daughter came up to me the other day and, you know, she wanted to tell me something, or she said something about how school had not gone well that day. And I said, well, you know, why? What's up? She said, nothing. It's nothing. And I kind of, well, no, like, what, is there something you want to talk about? I'm here if you need me, whatever.
Right.
And she said, no, you'll just think it's stupid. And so that was like a clue to me that there have probably been times at her age. Now, granted, she'll come to me with things like, oh, so-and-so stole my slime and now we're not best friends anymore, which can seem really trivial to me as an adult. Because I'm like, why does slime matter? And you're not going to remember this girl 10 years from now anyway. It's okay. Friends come and go. Or you'll be best friends again tomorrow. Like, that's how fast these things turn around.
Right.
And it made me realize, like, I could do better at being empathetic right now, like early on. And that will pave the way, first of all, for us to be more connected later when it gets to be more challenging when she's a teenager. And also, it models that empathy. It models that for them so that they can do that for other people.
Your example just points out how easy it is to innocently miss an opportunity to show empathy.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that I thought about when I was thinking about modeling empathy and compassion is another, like, it's getting more and more common. The road rage. Like, how many times either have I been like honked at and basically like verbally assaulted?
Mm-hmm.
I usually don't honk, but occasionally I will on the other side. But like, that's not modeling empathy and compassion.
Right.
And it is a commonplace thing happening in our society.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not blaming anybody for any road rage, but what I'm saying is that is a commonly accepted practice. It happens all the time.
Right. And that's with someone that you don't even know. And so it's really easy to just write them off as, well, they're a shithead.
Right.
But you're right. Even just saying out loud, well, maybe they were in a really big hurry and they didn't see me. Or just giving the generous assumption is practicing that empathy.
Even with myself, aside from anybody else being in the car, I have created this little challenge and game for myself to take a moment and say, I wonder what is going on for that person today.
Mm-hmm.
Like right now.
Yeah, getting curious.
Right.
I think there is very much an element of curiosity to being empathetic.
Yes.
Because you can't ultimately know.
Well, and again, the idea of being present in someone else's experience and or feeling, or like, if you're not present, you're not curious, right?
Right. And you have to be a little more objective. You have to be standing back here instead of in your own shit. If you are not able to sit with your own shit, like your own feelings and your own stuff, you're not likely to be able to sit with someone else's stuff either, right? Which that impedes empathy. I think that's another piece here of teaching empathy and being able to model empathy, is that we've got to get better at knowing what's going on with us and holding space for ourselves to experience whatever we're experiencing. We are so constantly in our society escaping. We're chasing the shiny thing to get away from the stuff we don't want to deal with, which is like anything uncomfortable or inconvenient or all of that.
Yeah, and it could be hard to even know how to interpret what's going on with your own body. Like, what does it mean when you feel a feeling in your gut? Like a literal physical feeling. Yeah. What do I do when I feel a pressure in my chest?
Take a Tums.
No, turn on Netflix. God, you're not listening.
There's got to be some kind of magic pill to fix that.
Something.
That's all I'm saying. Yeah, so it is a challenge. We also mentioned last episode the concept of play and how play can foster empathy. Yes. And I think especially with boys, you have said yourself, and in this book that I was saying, Raising Boys, they talk about this idea of wrestling and like physically roughhousing, which I can't stand as a mother. It is like totally against what I want in my household. Like, I want everything to be calm and peaceful, but without fail. And Matt has been doing it from day one.
It is hardwired.
Yes. He would come home from work in his scrubs and all, and like set his keys down and instantly start rolling on the floor with the boys when they were little. And even now, like right before we go to bed sometimes, they'll start picking at each other, and they all of them start getting into this pile of bodies. And I'm just like...
Do you remember when we came home from New Mexico and we were all piled into your bedroom for some reason? Mm-hmm. And Penny was in there, and...
The dog.
The dog was like mouthing, like wrestling with all and barking, and me and the boys were like wrestling, and
yes,
everybody was in there.
That's that right. Is a typical scene.
And I don't even know why.
Trust me, I don't either. But it is. You're compelled to do it. I don't know. But in this book, he talks about how that's like a critical thing for boys in particular because they can start to learn limits and boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
What's too much and what's too little.
And to be fair, and you brought this up before, but I'm sure women and just people in general, we all have our different ways of learning this stuff, learning empathy, learning physical boundaries, and how to healthily communicate physically.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't tell you how much, just in my own experience as a person, can be communicated in a hug. The way that someone hugs, like
without padding, by the way.
Well, the padding is a signal or not a signal, right? That's like part of the language of hugging.
Yeah.
You know, you can come in like just shoulder contact. You could go full body.
The sideways hug. Yeah.
You know, it's the full squeeze, the half squeeze, the tap on the shoulder, the no forearm contact, the full forearm. I mean, there's so many ways that we can physically and do physically communicate with each other. But, you know, we have to learn that.
We do. And I think some of that has been taken away. Some of the opportunity for that has been taken away naturally by all of these devices and phones.
Well, we're just not interacting in the same way to some degree. Like that's just an observation. But I'll tell you that when I go into a restaurant now, what I don't see is, remember when we were kids and they had all the little arcade games and we would go in and we'd be like, Mom, Dad, give us some quarters. And we would be sitting in there, ironically playing on a screen,
right?
A very primitive screen, but we were interacting and like banging on the buttons and
being very
laughing
physical
at each other and all of this stuff.
Yeah.
Flash forward 35 years. And now there's no quarters. We just have our own phone. And I could be talking to you and playing a game, but you might be in a different state. And it's just different. It's an interaction. It's just not the same one.
Yeah. So before we kind of wrap up with micronutrients, I want to talk a little bit more about my kids have phones. They have laptops. You know, these are things that we gave them long ago. I'm realistically not taking them away. But, you know, some things that we do sometimes or have done in the past, and I probably am going to implement again, is giving them breaks from them, like physical breaks from them, meaning taking them away in the evening time at least, so that they don't feel so compelled to look at it. It is like a gravitational pull. I feel it myself as an adult. If it's near me, I sometimes want to pick it up and look at it. So like setting that boundary, I think, is helpful. I also am curious what you think about monitoring what it is, who they're talking to, what they're saying, you know, how much, because this is not something that our parents did, you know, like we didn't text anything. There was no, I guess they could have read some handwritten notes, you know, that we wrote back and forth, but they didn't have that option. And so is it an invasion of privacy or is it being safe? You know, how do you reconcile that?
I feel like that is a pretty personal decision.
Yeah.
But what I think is so important is that there is connection around what is happening or not happening digitally and also like in the physical world, like having a conversation, having a connection around that versus this being just a silent, like, oh, we're just all on our phones.
Yeah.
You know, and for me, like my personal take on this is it's important to have some level of understanding, but I'm also conscious about not wanting to be like hyper controlling either. And it is such a fine line. I don't profess to know how to do it or what the right point is to be with it. I will tell you that one question I ask all the time, like multiple times an hour sometimes, what are you doing on that thing? What's going on? Like, and I don't do it in a what are you doing, like an accusatory. It's more of a, I'm hoping for some little like crack in the doorway to just talk about something, even if it's benign.
Yeah. I have had talks with, I'm thinking of one of my kids in particular, and there's been like a noticing of how much time this one is spending on a certain app. And I just opened up the floor for a conversation about it.
Yes.
Hey, I've noticed what's going on here, because what you're supposed to be doing is this much time. and somehow you're getting this much time. And sometimes it was a genuine, nuh-uh, no, I haven't. And then look at the number of hours spent and it's like, oh, wow. So it was even a surprise to that kid, you know?
I love that because it illustrates that point of having a discussion, making an observation, but you're not at the super intrusive level of like monitoring every word that the kid says to this person and that person.
Yeah. And I think to your point, the underlying thing that we're striving for as parents is being connected,
Right.
being connected, being connected, being connected. And so how do you foster that connection? And that could look different between any parent and any one kid, right?
Right.
But I think bottom line is not coming at them guns blazing when you think something's up, respecting that they are an individual with feelings, you know, and being able to be present with them and whatever is going on with them.
Right.
Instead of jumping to problem solving or criticism.
Yeah.
You know, which can be really tough as a parent because a lot of times we do know better. Like we do know what you could do to make it better in this situation.
Right.
But they're supposed to be learning for themselves a little bit here.
Right. There's this balance between kind of healthy modeling and discussion about what's going on in that online digital world, as well as just coming back to the basics of the physical world. And I love the story that came up around everybody wrestling and being chaotic. Like when we got back from the New Mexico trip, you know, that's just people being people. And there's a physicality and a connection, a physical connection that comes with that.
Mm-hmm.
That's just important.
Yeah.
I can't always explain why, but I can feel it. Like it's just healthy to connect in that way.
And it is a connector.
Yeah.
And it's a particular connector for boys, like that kind of physicality.
Yes.
And so as much as it drives me fucking crazy that right before we go to bed, that happens, I'm trying to tell myself, this is what they need. This is what they need.
And to your credit, I don't remember you really getting, you know, outwardly frustrated by that beyond the normal.
No, I do it inwardly.
Well, yeah, but it wasn't in a serious way. It was like, oh my God,
no.
you guys are blah, 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 you know, but we just kind of ignore that because that's part of the...
Yeah. Well, and I also, before we close here, I want to talk about the importance of teaching our kids to be able to process their emotions, particularly boys, because I think historically, you know, the only acceptable emotion for boys has been anger, which really doesn't lead to good places most of the time. That's shifting, you know, that's started to shift, but I think we could always do more. And again, I think if we are not able to be in our own emotions and process our own feelings, whatever those are, and by the way, there's like a billion. It's not just like happy, sad, angry. Understanding ourselves and giving ourselves space to process our own feelings is just as important for our kids, you know, because once they're able to do that for themselves, rather than trying to escape them, I think we're a lot better off.
It's important for all of us to do that. If I can't do that as an adult and an individual, it will be very hard for me to model that as a parent and or mentor.
Right. Like when you think about the show, the Adolescents show, and you think of the dad.
Oh, I felt for him so much.
I know. And the sadness that was there, that turned into aggression. Like that's a classic example. That's something that Jamie, his son, witnessed regularly. And men feel all the emotions just like women do. So if he had, you know, if only he had been able to better regulate his emotions and understand himself and be with them, his behavior would have come out a whole different way. And that would have modeled something completely different for Jamie. You know, so that's what we're doing as parents. Like that's what we need to work on. And all of us do. I do too. You know, I'm not the most outwardly emotional person, but it's important that our kids see that.
Right.
So that's my little soapbox on that. What are you taking away from this conversation today? What are your micronutrients?
That making space for connection is really important. Making space to just physically connect, separate from the digital world, and making space to have conversations about what's going on in the digital world and really bring that aspect like more to life in the day-to-day.
Because that is a part of their world.
It's a part of all of our worlds. It's just the way it's a part of their world is different than the way it's a part of my world. And I think that maybe for at least a while technology is rapidly moving like it is, we're going to see these stratifications where for one generation, it's this. For another generation, it's that. And then the next one, it's this. So just having some acknowledgement that it is different for everybody. And that's an opportunity to be curious about what it's like for somebody else. And to talk about that. And the other thing that was so big is the idea of compassion and empathy. And back to the idea of understanding and modeling how to manage emotions, feel emotions, express emotions, identify emotions. That is all embedded in compassion. And without the ability to have that understanding of all of those feelings in those different contexts, showing up for someone and putting yourself in their shoes, trying to understand and be curious about their experience, like you can't do it.
You're talking about Brene Brown's book, Atlas of the Heart, essentially, which is a fantastic book that tells you about all of these different emotions and feelings. We typically think of like the 3 or 4 but there's this whole range. And the more we can put language to that and communicate that and understand it ourselves, infinitely better it gets in terms of us being able to understand other people and empathize with their situation. And that is something that once we learn better as adults, we can model that more for our kids and so on and so forth. I love that. For me, I think I don't ever want to make assumptions. I've learned too much that even though I've had some really open and honest conversations preemptively with my preteens, I don't ever want to assume that I know what's going on in their lives. I need to ask, and I need to be really involved in their lives in whatever ways I can. That might mean I'm really have a deep understanding of who their friends are. Who are they running around? Who are their friends' parents? You know, who are these people that are such an important part of their lives? Because they are the most important part of their lives in this stage of life, their peers. So me having an idea of who those people are is incredibly important. And so that feeds into what I wanted to say next, which is just staying connected. Just like you said, having that space for connection. And that might mean taking away their devices for a period of time so that they can have a break. And that's how I want to frame it to them. It's not like, oh, you're punished or, oh, I don't trust you. It's, hey, relax and take a break.
And when you say it in such a way of like taking away the device, sometimes it might look like that, but there's also ways to frame activities that just don't involve devices.
Absolutely. And then finally, really practicing what I preach. You know, when I'm telling them, you've got to have empathy for people and you've got to do this and da-da-da-da. I've got to do all of that. I have to do that. And that's not always easy. And that's still a work in progress on my part.
Yeah, I love that. That's exactly where I was going with the road rage thing. I mean, what an opportunity. The next time that happens and there's a child in the car, that's an opportunity.
That's an opportunity to say out loud,
what's going on with that person today? I wonder if they're having a hard day. Be curious. Vocalize it.
Just see what that does over time. All right. Well, basically, we have a lot of questions and no clue.
Well, we said zero clue.
Zero clue. I mean, ultimately, I wish we had answers for this kind of thing. But
me too.
You know, we're right there with everybody else trying to figure it out. And I don't know that anybody has the answer. This is new stuff. We just got to keep showing up and doing the best that we can.
Yeah. Well, thanks for hanging out with us today.
Yeah. And we will see you next time.
In the mud.
In the mud.
Thanks for being with us in the mud today.
If you liked this episode, do us a huge favor and subscribe to the show. This is going to make sure you never miss an episode, and it's going to help us grow our muddy community, which would mean the world to us.
See you next time in the mud.